I'm gonna start this video off with a very simple statement. I think that right now, the NBA is as talented as a league overall as it has ever been. And not only is that fun, but it's actually critically important to the success of the league, given what I think is going to happen over the next couple of seasons. Now, the thing that's interesting about this is the statement that I just made. I don't think that's all that difficult to prove. I think when you go back and look at the league throughout, the decades and decades past, just overall talent-wise, top-level players, specifically in terms of scoring, the statistical argument you basically have to throw out because there's so many more points being scored and there's so many more three-pointers and all that. But just in terms of general talent, I don't really think it's that much of an argument. I feel like over the last 10 to 15 years, we've continually funneled more and more, progressively more and more talent into the league. And for a variety of reasons that I'm going to get into in this video, there's just more talent in the league. But I think those reasons are the most interesting part of this because primarily there's two things that are happening here. One, players are playing longer and they're playing better later into their careers. And two, the talent pool that's coming into the NBA year after year is just so much wider. When you think about, this revolution that kind of happened in, the early to the mid 2000s where the international game becomes such a bigger part of the NBA, and the NBA really started to push that. They wanted to become a more popular league internationally, and the success of guys like Dirk Nowitzki, Pau Gasol, Manu Ginobili, on and on and on, Tony Parker, international players coming into the league really helped bolster the talent level. And it's gotten to the point now where those first couple of guys, it was, like one per team or a handful of guys, to now you could argue that 3 of the 5 best players in the entire league are international players, if not more than that number. When you think about guys like Giannis and Jokic and Luka, you could argue that the NBA is not only as international of a league as it's ever been, but almost like you could almost frame it as an international league. Obviously, there's a ton of domestic players in the league, but at the top, there's so many incredible non-American players. And whether it be that avenue or the G League or a couple of other things we're going to talk about in this video, the league has gotten so much better at cultivating talent from all different kinds of avenues rather than just the typical, here's a really good high school player, they go to college for a year and then they get to the league. And the irony of that international growth in terms of the player base in the league is that initially the league just wanted to be more of a worldwide thing for money. Like they wanted financially to bring in, more eyes to the league and kind of bring a more international following. And it's actually, one, it's resulted in that, but two, it's also resulted in all these incredible players that have basically been like found by the league or become incredible players internationally. And then they come over here and the NBA is like their goal that they want to get to. And it's weird how they've actually ended up at that conclusion. And then as I mentioned previously, I think that the way that players are able to play later into their careers and be better later into their careers is a huge deal for this as well. I mean, we've still got guys like, Chris Paul and LeBron in the 2003 and the 2004 draft that are still really critical parts, not only of the league, but their teams individually. Regularly, we're seeing guys that are 34, 35 years old still be, star and all-star level players. I think, for example, someone like Steph is going to continue to age really, really well. The way that the game has shifted into a less physical style play and a much more free-flowing, of course, three-point shooting becoming as big of a part of the game as ever. All that has allowed these guys to stay relevant and stay good longer, which means that as long as you're continually bringing in good players on the front end of this, it's always going to feel like there's a ton of incredible talent in the league. And that's really important for a league that for a little bit there, it seemed like there was a concern about like, what's the post LeBron version of the NBA going to look like? And was there going to be like a passing of the torch? Was there going to be someone that was as recognizable for the league and as important to the league as LeBron? And I don't think that's a question at all anymore because of the incredible amount of talent. Again, I think about those 3 guys internationally, Luka, Jokic, and Giannis, that are really going to be carrying the league moving forward, without even mentioning some of the super, super young guys that I think are going to be incredible as well. Guys like Anthony Edwards, guys like LaMelo Ball, Paolo now, Victor Wembanyama, of course, moving forward. And it's so much fun for the league. And it's really interesting to kind of dig into why exactly this is happening. Because when you look at basically every modern draft, right? So I kind of think of the 2003 draft as the first like modern NBA draft. It was a much bigger deal. It was obviously, a much bigger television event. And the way that teams drafted then is relatively similar to how they draft now. And everything prior to that was pretty much different. And ever since then, you can look at the history of pretty much every class with a few exceptions. In the first round, you're getting, at least 3 all-NBA to all-star level guys and a couple of other, pretty good players sprinkled in, unless you have like an incredible draft like 2003 or, for example, a class like 2019. There's exceptions, a class like 2013, which Giannis ends up saving that class. Rudy Gobert's in that group. Oladipo's in that group. But overall, like the first overall pick, Anthony Bennett's not very good. And overall, when you look at that, there's always a couple of really good players, top level players, and that's remained pretty much the same. But I think overall, teams have gotten so much better at developing the players that they draft and drafting the correct guys. Like, we've moved away from, the Thomas Robinson, Ebke Udos of the world going in the top 5 or the top 7 of drafts. Everybody wants upside, they want potential, they want skill, they want size, they want length, and all of those things, translate better to a solid NBA career than guys, for example, like Thomas Robinson, Ebke Udoh, these just like energy and effort hustle big guys. And also, I think it's so much more clear now than it's ever been what a good NBA player looks like, right? Because the roles are so much more clearly defined. You're either a primary guy that's going to be, creating and facilitating, or you're a wing that's going to defend and shoot, or you're going to be kind of in between those two, or you're going to be a shot blocking big or a floor spacer. And there's a lot of different ways to be a productive NBA player, provided you can shoot the ball if you're a perimeter player. And that's never really been as defined in the past as it is now. And that helps these guys continue to grow and develop in a way that it's just so much easier for them to follow this path, right? Where they know exactly the skills that they need to work on. They know exactly what an all-star level player looks like in terms of creator in the pick and roll. Everybody plays pretty much the exact same, which at times from a viewing experience can get a little bit old, but in terms of player development, it's perfect, because even if you do get traded 3 years into your career, like, everybody pretty much plays the exact same way. It's a very efficient style of play. It's a style of play that all these kids, especially in the States, are playing that style growing up and through AAU, through high school, through college, and it's really streamlined the development process. And I also just think that player development has become such a bigger priority for these teams. So we have a good amount of teams like tanking every single year, which means that they don't really care if, their 7th overall pick from the year before doesn't put up great efficiency numbers in their first 2 seasons, because they're not necessarily trying to win. They're trying to develop that guy into a good player for 2 to 3 years from now. Guys are getting more and more minutes. Like, the days of, the top 10 picks sitting on the bench and playing 10 minutes a game for the first 2 seasons, those days are over. And I think largely that's good for the development of the league, even if, you think tanking is an issue for the league, which is a different discussion entirely. And that development means that teams don't really miss at the top of drafts anymore. Like, there are still, players that end up becoming basically nothing in the top 10s of draft. That's just always going to happen. You're banking on, 18 and 19 year olds in many cases, and what they're going to develop into 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years from that point in which you draft them. But the days of like multiple really bad top 10 busts are kind of over, because even if you don't become, an all-star level player with a top 10 pick, for the most part, you still become like a solid shooter or a solid defender, or a big that can roll to the rim, or you can do something productive. And again, that comes with that extra development of having the extra run on the floor, the extra patience that teams are like, what? If it takes you 2.5 years to figure it out, that's fine, because we don't really want to be good for 2.5 years anyway if we're picking in the top 10. And I just think teams have gotten so much better at figuring out exactly what a player's role needs to be, exactly, how they need to play, and how much time they need to give them before officially giving up on them and moving on, in addition to, I think, just overall getting better at drafting. And all of those factors come together to create a league that I think is just so unbelievably talented. And as I teased in the intro, that's going to become really, really important. And it's not just the LeBron point that I made earlier, where you want, a ton of talent in the post-LeBron era to make sure there's still a lot of interest in the league. But if we're operating under the assumption, as I am and a lot of other people are, that over the next couple of seasons, there is going to be expansion in the league, and there are going to be 2 new teams added, whether it be Vegas and Seattle, whether it be Mexico City, whether it be whatever the case may be, you need a lot of talent, because if they go to an expansion draft and it operates in a similar way as it has in the past, a lot of these talented guys are going to start getting, taken away from some of these teams. The way it's happened in the past is you protect like your top 6 or your top 8 players. Everybody else is put into a draft for these other 2 teams to pick from. And in the past, when the league has expanded, that has resulted in a league that is just not nearly as deep, and is definitely messed with kind of, how competitive the league is on a night-to-night basis. And I think having as much talent in the league as there is right now is going to really, really help that product continue to stay consistent and competitive, even when adding an expansion draft, because again, in the past, that has been an issue. Which brings me to my final point. You might disagree with some things that I've said in the video, or maybe you don't think the league is all that talented or as talented as it's ever been. Just look at the teams just throughout the league and tell me where the actual like legitimately bad basketball teams are in terms of talent, right? Like, maybe it doesn't all fit together. Maybe they're not super well coached. Maybe they don't win a ton of games, but where's the non-talented team in the league? I said coming into the year that I thought San Antonio was the least talented team in the league. Keldon Johnson is playing incredibly well. Like, Devin Vassell is really good. Like, they've got a couple of guys on that roster that are already looking like guys that are going to continue to grow and develop into really good players. Utah doesn't necessarily have the young talent except for Lauri Markkanen, who's playing really, really well, but they've got a ton of vets on their roster that are really helpful and can help other teams. There's talent there. Oklahoma City is a team that's not very good, or at least haven't been for the last couple of seasons, but they're incredibly talented. Same thing with Houston, Detroit. Like, that's the difference to me, is there's always going to be bad teams. You can only have so many teams that are really, really good, but the overall depth and how often you can just point to a team and say, oh, we're better than them, we're more talented than them, we're going to win this game easily. I don't think there's that many easy games now throughout an NBA regular season because we're getting so much better at developing these guys. And if you get picked, in the top 5 or in the top 10, chances are you're going to be some level of productive for the team that drafted you or involved in a trade and ultimately be productive with a different team. And that speaks to not only the advances we've made in terms of development, but again, the overall talent of the league with these international players, guys that are playing longer and just getting better at this overall, which is a fantastic thing for the league. And by the way, all of this is happening with a couple of drafts that haven't necessarily come across as like generational. So obviously like the Zion Ja Morant one in 2019, everybody thought Zion was this generational player. He's going to be incredible if he's healthy. But like we haven't had like a LeBron draft, right? I mean, Luka's been unbelievable. That was a really good class. But this upcoming class, the Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, and whoever else class, like Wembanyama could legitimately be the best prospect since LeBron, potentially the best prospect this century coming into the NBA, even over LeBron. And that is probably, if that ends up being the case, going to be like the cherry on top to the talent pool and this influx of talent we've seen coming into the league. And if it continues to happen like that, it's going to be such great basketball. It's going to set the league up really well for expansion, which is something that they really want to do. It's going to bring more teams to more cities, which is just fun. And overall, I would argue that right now the NBA is doing a better job than any other sports league in the world at developing, cultivating, and getting interest in young talent to come to their league, and overall just creating the best talent pool of any sports league in the world.